You know that feeling when you think you're being watched? That quiet internal jolt when your body notices before your brain does. The hairs on your arms lift. Your pace quickens, just slightly. And even though you're completely alone, you still check. Now imagine you're walking alone through the mountains. Just the trail, the wind, and the distant sound of your own footsteps. It's beautiful, serene, peaceful. Until it isn't. You stop for a second, look toward the ridgeline, and there it is. Just a shape. Far off, human-like, standing perfectly still, just watching. You blink and it's gone. No sound, no trace. Just that feeling again, stronger this time. And if you bring it up later, you'll hear the same story from somebody else. Same figure, place, same silence. It doesn't matter who you are. Hikers, hunters, writers, locals. People have been seeing them for generations. We don't know who they are, we don't know what they are, but people have a name for them. If you too don't know what you are, check out Pantheon, our brand inspired by myths, legends and folklore. We ship worldwide and are rated excellent on Trustpilot. Link in the description. If this was just one person's story, you could dismiss it. If it was two, maybe a coincidence. But people have been seeing this figure for generations, and they keep describing the same thing. The details don't change much. A tall, human-shaped silhouette standing perfectly still, usually far off, sometimes on a ridge, sometimes framed against the sky. Faceless, soundless, and no clear explanation of how it got there or where it went. It never approaches or speaks, just stands and stares. Some people describe a cloak or a long coat. Some say it looks like it's wearing a brimmed hat. Others say there's no detail at all, just a shape, darker than it should be, outlined against the light. But nearly every report agrees on three things. It's tall, it doesn't move, and it disappears the second you look away. The Chumash people, one of the oldest indigenous cultures of California, lived on the coastal region around the Santa Lucia mountains for thousands of years. Their oral traditions speak of beings in the high places, entities that stayed on the ridges, silent and watchful. They weren't something you challenged or tried to reach, but simply acknowledged them and kept your distance. When Spanish missionaries and settlers came through to the region in the 1700s, they too described strange figures in the mountains. Silent shapes seen from afar, beings that seemed to vanish before they could be approached. Some of the earliest records describe entire routes being avoided because of a feeling, a sense of being observed, as if the mountains themselves are watching. And then there's John Steinbeck, one of America's most famous authors, the man behind The Grapes of Wrath, Of Mice and Men, East of Eden. He grew up in Salinas, California, just inland from the Santa Lucia range. He knew these hills. In a short story called Flight, published in 1938, Steinbeck makes a passing reference to what he calls dark watchers. Rather than introduce or explain, he just mentions them, the way the locals might, casually, like they're part of the scenery. Pepe looked suspiciously back every minute or so, and his eyes sought the tops of the ridges ahead. Once, on a white barren spur, he saw a black figure for a moment. But he looked away quickly, for it was one of the dark watchers. No one knew where the watchers were, nor where they lived. But it was better to ignore them and never show interest in them. They did not bother anyone who stayed on the trail and minded his own business. Just a man in the story, seeing one and then looking away. That's what you're supposed to do. Years later, Steinbeck's son, Thomas, would confirm that these weren't just fictional embellishments. He said he'd grown up hearing about them from people who lived in the area, that the locals didn't treat them as ghosts or cryptids, just something that was there, something you didn't talk about unless you had to. He wrote, "My father and I considered it both height of bad manners and dangerous to shoot your mouth off about such things. If you saw one, you simply didn't go into that part of the mountains again." Hundreds of accounts spread out over centuries, all saying the same thing. There's something on the ridge. It doesn't move, it doesn't speak, and it's been watching us for a very long time. The Santa Lucia Mountains stretch along California's central coast, where the land rises too sharply to feel settled and the ocean disappears behind the sheer drops of rock and brush. They're dry, eroded, brutal in places, a jagged wall of ridgelines and coastal cliffs where the air thins without warning and the silence feels a little too complete. This is where the watchers are always seen, not deep in the woods or crossing a trail, but high above, already present before you arrive, simply there, standing on exposed ridges that cut across the sky. But what matters is what that location means. Throughout human history, we've projected meaning upwards. Mountains are where revelation happens, where law is delivered. You ascend, you meet your God. That symbolism is buried deep. We still speak of high authority, of moral high ground, of falling from grace. Elevation has always been tied to power and separation. The watchers never appear on equal footing. No one has ever seen one up close. No one has ever looked down at them. They're always above, and they never descend. This positioning creates a kind of structure. You're forced to observe them from beneath. There's something existential about that. Most hauntings happen inside the human world. A flicker in a hallway, a noise in the basement, a cold breath in a sealed room. The fear that something has entered your space. But the watchers are different. You've entered their space. The psychological weight comes from where it stands and the quiet, gnawing awareness that you are beneath it. That's what the ridgeline is, a boundary. You can cross it if you want. You can hike higher, get closer, but something in you resists. And if you do push forward, if you do ignore the silence and the shift in the air, you'll find something worse than fear. You'll find nothing. The figure will be gone, and in its place just a ridge, just the wind, just the open sky and quiet, irreversible feeling that something saw you and chose not to act. It was already above you, and it still is. There's a moment after a sighting when the mind starts trying to make sense of what just happened. You go through the list, you start with what you know. Some describe them as a kind of shadow person, a term that has become a catch-all for unexplained silhouettes seen in the periphery. Usually indoors, usually fleeting. But the dark watchers don't behave like that. They don't appear inside homes or at the edge of your bed. They remain outside, and you can see them in full, and they don't leave until you look away. So maybe it's a trick of the mind, fatigue, overexposure, the brain's tendency to find patterns in randomness. You're alone on the trail, you're tired, the light shifts, the terrain plays tricks on your depth perception. It would be comforting if that were enough. But these sightings cluster. Same region, same elevation, same posture, same stillness. Whole, recognizable, and then gone. Others have suggested something older, that the Dark Watchers are something tied to the land itself, bound to place. You have entered their field of view, and for that moment, that view sharpens, and it closes again. Maybe they're a kind of sentinel, but if that's true, then what are they watching for? Because it doesn't seem to be us. Maybe that's what all of these explanations are missing, the possibility that this phenomenon isn't about us at all, that the watchers are not reacting, they're simply in position, waiting, unmoving, fixed, and we keep catching them in the act of doing something we don't understand. We call them the Dark Watchers, but what if we're not the ones being watched? At its core, the fear of being seen is the fear of exposure, of being witnessed without context, without defense, without meaning. Something sees you and does nothing. Silence can be worse than aggression. At least aggression makes you matter. The Dark Watchers don't confirm or deny your existence, so your mind starts folding in on itself. What did it see in you? What didn't it see? Why was it watching? What conclusion did it draw? The terror comes from what you might be in its eyes. Compare how we usually construct observations in myth and religion. Gods see and act. Angels descend, they intervene. Even the coldest biblical watcher has a function. There's some kind of verdict, some closure. But this, the Dark Watcher, just looks. It neither acknowledges nor dismisses. It offers no signal that it even cares if you're there. You're left in a state of unresolved awareness, present but undefined. You've been seen in full, and whatever saw you decided you weren't worth engaging with. That you are not a threat, mystery, beauty, or anything. Just another presence passing through. That your story ends in dismissal. It creates nothing, it says nothing, it leaves you alone in your own interpretation. With your own questions. You're the one who fills in the meaning. You decide whether you've seen something divine or something monstrous. Whether it's protector, sentinel, or indifference made visible. But deep down, it's not the figure that haunts you. It's the realization that something saw you and made no move. That maybe, in the presence of something truly ancient, you don't matter at all. You know that feeling when you think you're being watched? Stillness, distance, something waiting on the ridgeline, but not for you. You keep walking. You don't look back, but the feeling lingers. Because the ridge is never empty. You are.